The Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Planted with Sara Pyan. I'm Sara Pyan, your host, and today I have a very special guest, Nat Pennington, CEO and founder of Humboldt Seed Company. Nat, thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, it's a pleasure and an honor.
I didn't get a chance to talk to you when we were in Barcelona because you guys were super, super busy. It was so much fun to see so many familiar faces, but to also see so many people coming up to your booth, curious about the genetics and really engaging with everybody that was hanging out there.
We love that event, and it's always it makes you feel like you're doing good when people come and talk to you about their experience, and getting to share the ganja love is what it's all about. So
yeah, that was actually my first Spanibus. Jeff and I were there, and he strolls up in his Huckleberry Hill Farms shirt, and Johnny was like, I see you. It was so much fun. I was telling Johnny and Rose, how is it that you can feel like you're at a homecoming of a place that you've never been?
I know, right? That's so true. And I guess it's just sort of, we live in this special place. I mean, even where you're at, I feel like, just the sort of north side of the state of California has had this, I'm imagining that the folks, from Amsterdam, from these sort of cannabis hubs and communities have a similar kind of, feeling when they travel to here for, say Emerald Cup or something like that. They had that similar homecoming where you're far, far away from home.
Yeah.
But it's a good point. It did definitely feel the most like that this last Spanibus, because we really did bring a lot of the Emerald Triangle or the Cali vibes, let's just say, to Spain with us. So that was cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. All the different people who came together, it was, from all over the world, just how much they complement each other. And getting to see like the different approaches and style, but we all have this common thread of the love of what we do.
Yes. Yeah. And what comes along with usually, with being into cannabis is being, a little bit of maybe a rebel or a little bit of forward thinking or whatever you want to call it. But it's a little community without a doubt.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So I have a lot I want to dig in with you today, but first off, I want to ask you the question that I ask all my guests. What was your first cannabis experience?
Oh gosh. Ding ding.
No worries.
Figure out how to turn that off. But my first, and I knew that you were coming with this. So there's a couple different ones, but the most memorable one, because I was into skateboarding, and in my little suburban Philadelphia neighborhood, there were some older kids that were super cool. I mean, these were, I was 12 and they were like the epitome of the coolest kids ever. And of course, right? They knew how to skateboard, and so they shared some cannabis, I guess you could call it. But that experience was just, I didn't really feel much. But my real first experience was probably like a year later when a girl that I was sweet on wanted to go see the movie Jurassic Park, and it was in the theaters, and I had gotten some, I think probably just from the same skateboarder crew that was down the road, and was kind of like, oh, we could go in the parking lot and then sneak off in the bushes and then come back and go into the movie theater. And that's what we did. And oh my gosh, was Jurassic Park a wild movie. And that's sort of like was my first really fun, this is, and my experience was, and this is like, I know I've said this over and over again, but my experience was like, and this isn't the way it should be, but my initial thought was like, there is nothing harmful or dangerous about this. This is like just made the movie more interesting, and was and for all the stuff that they told me in the DARE program and in all of these, it was still coming off of like Nancy Reagan and that whole time when it was sort of the war on drugs. And I thought to myself, like, boy, does this mean that all of the different drugs that they talk about, how they're going to kill you and going to make you turn into a crazy person, are they lying about all of them? And it turns out that they weren't lying about all of them. They were just lying about the few. And so,
Right.
and so just being the rebellious youth that I was, I pretty much tested that and found out like that there were some really, really dangerous things out there in the world that, I hope my children never test things like that. And I hope to tell them just the truth, like some things you just really, really want to stay away from because they can kill you. But other things, are less dangerous than alcohol, less dangerous than the things that are societally normal. You know what I mean? So that was my first experience, was like literally having a great time with this girl, Michelle. And then, I don't know, we probably held hands. It was the first, and then coming out of the theater and just being like, boy, was I kind of told a load of crap about cannabis and, at the time, marijuana.
Right. But I mean, I always think that cannabis is a great foray, I should say, into thinking critically. Because like you said, there are things out there that are really harmful. So how do we teach people, maybe don't dive into things, but, do your due diligence, figure out what works for you, and understand, the harms of things as well. Like I always love, like I worked in retail for a decade in cannabis, and as an educator, watching people have their aha moments, especially like I remember there was a woman who came in during the 215 days, and she was very anti-cannabis, but she'd had breast cancer, and she had neuropathy from her treatment. Nothing was helping, so her doctor was like, I think you should consider seeing if cannabis will help. And she came in with her adult son, and she was like, no one's gonna know I'm here, right? I'm like, no. She's like, I don't do drugs, I don't do anything like that. I'm like, that's fine. I don't want to get high. Yes, I get it. I'm like, we can talk about this. Like I always would ask people, what are you comfortable with? How do you react to other things? And just to try to figure out what a person's sensitivity is. So I took out an 18-to-1 tincture for her, and I was like, let's start with this. Let's start really with a low amount of THC, and I'll show you how to dose it, and it may even help you with your anxiety. And she was like, I'm not anxious. And her son, and you know how we know our parents sometimes better than they know themselves. He's like, yeah, you are. But so I helped her with that. And then when we were done, 3 days later, she called and she's like, there's my girl. And I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, what's up? And she's like, this is the first thing that's helped me with my pain, because gabapentin made me really crabby. It wasn't helpful. And I didn't realize that I did have anxiety, because this has actually really calmed me down. And I'm super angry that the stigma has kept me from the relief that I needed. And the kicker was, she was a retired pharmaceutical salesperson.
Wow. Oh.
And she's like, I will go with you to your classes. I will talk to seniors. And I was like, what you should do? You should talk to your friends and family.
Yeah.
And let them know. And it's not that it's for everyone, but it's a possibility. And when you look at all of the harmful things in the world that we either use medicinally or recreationally, it's kind of a no-brainer when you start to learn more about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, boy, I have quite a few folks in my extended family that, are unfortunately, have prescriptions for things that I'm just like, wow, that is so much more of a serious undertaking to be like, on a sleeping medication that's like, just, I'm throwing something out there, but it was like an Ambien or something like that, where, I tried Ambien one time and I had one of the more horrible experiences with any drug, um, where I lost kind of control of and it was just a simple sleeping pill that I would thought, when there was a time where I was having some trouble sleeping and a friend of mine was prescribed this, and then so they offered it. I know that's not supposed to be the way you think,
Kids
but
don't do this at home.
don't don't do what I did, because it was horrible, and it was
Man.
like, I had this whatever, and so I'm like, wow, that's the alternative. The alternative to that is something that is just, I have a lot of my mom, my closer family that I've gotten, been able to help them source for sleep cannabis, and people just, it's like night and day
Yeah.
compared to some of the other stuff that's out there. I mean, there's just no doubt in my mind. I'm like, this is 100% a better way of dealing with, sleep troubles and so many other things. I mean, the epilepsy stuff, and those are things that I'm not speaking firsthand about, but I know just from my own experience that, like, and my immediate family, that I would way rather help my mom track down good CBN or THC mixture gummies to help sleep, and know that my mom isn't going to have the same long-term crazy mind-bending effects of some of the pharmaceuticals that are out there, because, I can say firsthand that, like, that one that I mentioned was insane. It was so and it like zombified people, and these natural remedies. Um, I've been living in Northern California for over 30 years, so I know that there are some that is, it's a balance. It's like you can't just ignore all of the amazing things that Western medicine can do. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
I don't. If I break my arm, I'm probably going to go get an X-ray. But there are a lot of times when you might find some really good remedies just with looking in, your garden, or looking to nature. Let's
Yeah,
just say.
I think it's all of the above, right? I mean, it's for myself, like when people will say to me, because I got into cannabis because in my late 30s, I had stage 3 colon cancer. I was working in civil rights and nonprofit. And, I always enjoyed cannabis. I'd never thought about it medicinally. My mom was a hematology oncology nurse and a cancer researcher, so I knew THC would help with appetite and things like that. But I had no idea exactly what it would do. And that, like, changed everything for me, like really learning like how people could benefit from it, but also having the balanced conversation about it might not be for everybody, but it's not the end all be all, because you really need to integrate everything into your wellness plan, whether it's traditional medicine, herbal medicine, cannabis, what have you. It all can play a really important part. But I want to back up a second, because you said you were from Philly. And how the heck did you get over here and start growing? Like, where did that happen? Humboldt Seed Company from California's legendary Emerald Triangle is the state's largest licensed cannabis seed provider. Blending traditional breeding with modern innovation, they've created fan favorites like jelly donuts, chicken and waffles, California haze, and the cult classic blueberry muffin. Visit HumboldtSeedCompany.com for top quality seeds and educational content. And keep an eye out for their upcoming Uruguay documentary. With pheno-hunts at leading farms worldwide, Humboldt Seed Company brings unique aromas and flavors straight to you.
Well, I was born in New York, and then I did high school in Philly, and I think my, deep down, I knew somehow that, being in the concrete jungle wasn't really my speed, and so I ended up traveling across the country. I did not even a semester of school for thinking I was going to do glass blowing and be an artist and whatnot, ceramics. But it was so much student loan. I just figured out, I don't know what I'm doing yet. I don't know why I'm devoting, committing to this. So dropped out when the high school sweetie rekindled, and we traveled across the country, and then actually split up. Not by my choosing, but somewhere in Arizona. And then I was just like, what do I do? And almost went back with my tail between my legs, but just pressed on, sort of like the classic, Jerry Garcia had died, and I had been to some dead shows, I think 12 dead shows from the age of 15 to 18. Managed to get into as many as I once I went, I was like, oh, this is so awesome. And that was the thing to do, and it was the coolest thing in the world, especially at that time. And I'm sure it still is for a lot of people that are new to it. Yeah, and then didn't know, so made it here got to California and just fell in love. Stayed a little bit in Santa Cruz at Panther Beach, and a little bit I had already did the Ocean Beach thing for just a short while. But when I finally made it up to Humboldt, which wasn't even the destination, but it was just sort of the West Coast California tour involved, getting to, we did the Haight for a minute and in San Francisco, but yeah, Humboldt, it was just sort of oh my gosh, this place is amazing. There's these, magical forests, and the redwoods are, 15 feet wide and hundreds of feet tall. And how could anything be more magical than, beaches and rivers and these trees, and then the weed was unreal, so even though I had no idea what I was doing, no idea why and how, I had hardly knew when I got there. I knew what Humboldt was. I always thought from growing up that it was the Humboldt County, the Humboldt County. I remember that getting here and being wait, this is the Humboldt, where all the best weed I've ever smoked in my life on the East Coast came from here. And so I didn't come here just to track that down. It's just it all sort of dawned on me, and I knew right away that I wasn't trying to go anywhere the next place. And so before long, I was able to integrate, and eventually I did for a long time, I did salmon research, and kind of, was willing to participate in these programs as a volunteer, which then very quickly I was able to segue into a job. And then next thing I knew it, I was running the program at one of the nonprofits here. And then before I knew it, 8 years later, we were running this massive campaign that was really successful. And we did one of the largest river restoration projects and dam removals in world history. um, which I was pretty involved with from day one. And then also started doing genomics research in in that vein. But the whole time it was Humboldt County, and it's kind of like we did this thing where at least I was like, okay, I'm going to maintain a job that is kind of when you run into somebody, hey, what do? You say, oh yeah, I'm a salmon biologist. I do salmon surveys with the Salmon River Restoration. I do yada yada. But if it was, you know, then if your conversation got a little bit more in depth and you um, thought you could, should tell the person, you're like, okay, and I also have a big garden, and as you know, like when 215 happened, um, that kind of became more and more where we could talk about it. But
Mm-hmm.
I definitely wasn't talking about it in 97 when I was scrambling around on the hillside, you know planting gardens with uh, even would wear like a fishnet, or not a fishnet, a stocking, like I was scared, and we were doing it. I was guerrilla doing it back then. So,
It was a
uh,
different time. You and I got to this coast at the same time when you were
oh yeah,
probably while you were like checking out the hate. I was living and working there. It was an interesting time in Humboldt too, because I remember that was like Julia Butterfly Hill with the redwoods and just all the different things that were going on. Like
yeah.
Northern California was.
I got here in 95.
Oh,
So,
okay, yeah, I was 96.
okay. So, and then, yeah, 96, my friends and I hitchhiked to vote for Prop 215.
Right on.
That's always going to be memorable for me, the hitchhiking to the ballot box. But yeah, 95. And you're right, Julia Butterfly. That was so really close friends of mine were like her biggest support networks. Like she was dating a very close friend of mine when she first went up in the tree, and then they broke up while she was in the
Oh,
tree.
jeez.
Woody Harrelson would lock himself to the Golden Gate Bridge. Remember that one? He climbed up there
My
and
roommate was with him because I lived with Greenpeace activists at that time, and I was working in a dress shop in the Haight, and he was like, "You might have to bail me out of jail. I'm doing the Golden Gate Bridge with Woody," and I was like, "Oh shit."
that's awesome. That stuff is so cool. Yeah, Judy Berry and Daryl with the Redwood Summer, and Bonnie Raitt would come, every spring. That was actually so. My daughter Hallie, who is a big part of the company now, was conceived at Redwood Summer, essentially doing with, the background to that was, it wasn't exactly planned. Definitely don't regret any of it at all, but it wasn't, I'll admit that it wasn't super planned. Um, but the background music was, Bonnie Raitt playing, don't cut all the last of the forests, and don't, uh, gosh, all the like dignitaries like Woody, and I feel like I'm forgetting some, but like that was an amazing time in Humboldt. Like you said, it was really, uh, it's been a journey, and I'm sure that you've had, like being in the Bay,
Mhm.
uh, an amazing cannabis journey as well. Like,
I had no idea what good cannabis was till I got here. I mean,
yeah,
what I just remember thinking it's more expensive than back in Michigan, but also when I got it, I was like, this is not like the crap that we would have to sift through back home. And by the way, I met your daughter at the state fair because we were part of the awards ceremony. She is lovely.
yeah,
Not
yeah.
only in spirit, but she's a beautiful, beautiful woman.
Wow. Yeah, that's been, I somehow have genes that make these beautiful girls, and it's I don't recommend it to any parents out there. It's hard, sometimes I think people are always like, oh, it would be so easy if you're, like a beautiful person, and I've learned over the years, I'm like, you know what? Like all these like super beautiful people have a lot of their own challenges that they have to deal with, like they end up getting misjudged and they end up, people make assumptions that aren't really based in any reality just because of the way someone looks and that kind of stuff happens. And
Yeah.
so I'm always like, well, my shortcomings are my, character building, you know what I mean? But I feel like you can, even as a gorgeous supermodel, you can end up having a lot of character that gets built from that too. So.
Yeah, it's all relative on our personal experiences. And you're right. Like people they have their biases, and you think that when somebody has a lot of things going for them, you would make assumptions about what their life must be like. But we're all human. We all have our experiences. We all have our challenges, and that's just very, very real. And I think that, recognizing that really creates greater compassion and acceptance of other people.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So, how did Humboldt Seed Company come to be? And I have a question to piggyback on that. What inspired you to create the company, and how has your vision changed since the early days?
Yeah. So um, I have a business partner, Ben Lind, as well, who was really integral in bringing the company out of just the little bubble that we, have here in the county and in this area. So um, Ben was there, basically really from the beginning. So it was sort of like um, I, after Prop 215 and for many, many years, I was breeding cannabis under Humboldt Seed Company. I went down right 10 blocks that way to the Humboldt County Courthouse and walked in there and said, is there a Humboldt Seed Company in the business license department? And they're, checking the computer and they're like, well, we don't see one. So I started the business, and that was just because this people may have heard this again and again. So I'll be quick. I had the seeds because I loved doing the breeding. I always it was like a self sufficiency kind of a thing, like where, I never wanted to have a spring where I didn't know what I was going to grow, and so, or didn't have as many options at my fingertips as I needed. And so I do it every year. And after enough years of that, the neighborhood people were like, regulars knocking on the door in December, January, February, blah, blah, blah. Partner at the time was probably looking out for my best interest. And she was like, stop telling people when they offer you money for your seeds, stop telling them to just like bring a beer or a 6-pack or whatever. And we'll have a beer and we'll give you seeds. That was like my thing. I was like, just bring a couple beers. We'll sit around the kitchen table and, you can leave with all your seeds you need or whatever. I don't feel like I was doing that much work. I was, but I just felt like I was doing it for myself. So why not share?
Yeah.
And then she's like, you don't need any more beer, dude. Like, come on, dude. You got enough. Gut wise, whatever wise. And so then that was it. That was like the impetus. And it wasn't about like entrepreneurialism or a great vision of something great. It was about, I did, have tons of nonprofit work that I was doing for salmon at the time. And I mean, I even went and worked for the U.S. Forest Service when I was like 19 here in Humboldt and 20. And I worked for the state doing just, cheap salmon survey job type stuff. And then the nonprofit was where my heart was. So we did that. And so it's kind of like you had to hide it. I hid it at the time. It grew and it grew. And then it got to a place where like after that, what I mentioned, where I went to the courthouse, Then 215 was what relatively accepted. And so I felt okay with putting something that was attached to my name onto a piece of paper that was on cannabis. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
you probably remember that was like the biggest jump for a lot of people was like, you know, we were all used to like, if we did write anything down about, you know, distributing or having cannabis that was more than just for our own head stash, that you like literally would like burn that piece of paper. You know what I mean? Like you, and this was very different because it was like, you know, somebody could go and they see something that said Humboldt Seed Company, they could go and trace it back to, you know, what I had written down at the county recorder, you know, and probably, you know, show up at my house. So that was a leap, and we did it, you know, kind of carefully. And you know, Ben was good with like really distributing the seed, so he would, he was a little bit more, I guess, abreast of what was happening on the bigger legalization push that was happening. I mean, it wasn't 2018, it wasn't that Prop 64, none of that had happened, but there were, you know, we were drafting, the state people were drafting that kind of legislation. We had seen, you know, Colorado went first. I mean, just for the record, Cali was the first one to ever have medical cannabis, and that was in 1996. And Dennis, who you may have met,
Yeah, many times.
a big hero, um, and those people that made that ballot initiative are heroes. Absolutely, should never be forgotten and should never not be thanked for as much as it's helped so many people. You know, both like financially, mentally, health wise, all of the great things. We really got to remember Dennis Barone and
Yeah.
his.
Well, and
You know,
it's one of those things where for those of us who got in earlier, I don't think people understand like what a you can kind of put your neck out. I mean, it's I know for myself, like, you know, and I didn't start as early as you did. I was several years later, but I remember the first time somebody wanted to write an article on my work, and I had to think about it for a second because I was like, that goes on my permanent record. Like, what if I decide not to do this anymore? What if I decide I want to go back and get a normie job? Will I ever be employable again? How much does this mean to me? And I
well,
realized that it meant so much that it was worth that risk. And then
yeah.
as we got into legalization, all these other people started pouring in. And then with cannabis, the industry kind of having major extinction events and people having to go back to, you know, jobs outside of cannabis, they're starting to see, wow, okay, if I've been in it for a while, I've got a lot of explaining to do to people because even though we are in an era of normalization, there is still significant stigma around the work that we do.
Are you looking for a lasting, meaningful way to connect with your audience and highlight your brand? Well, listen up, because Planted with Sara Payan is taking on new sponsors. Here's a powerful stat. 20% of listeners are more likely to support brands they hear about on a trusted podcast. And 60% actually look up that product after hearing about it. That's the power of podcasting. Planted with Sara Payan has a unique draw. With remarkable guests, we attract and engage audience that spans all sides of the cannabis spectrum. Picture your message reaching these listeners time and again. Podcast ads are evergreen, meaning your brand stays relevant as new audiences discover and binge past episodes. It's a long-term investment that keeps on giving. If you're looking for a targeted, passionate audience with lasting impact, the right listeners are here waiting to meet your brand. Visit plantedwithsara.com to get a copy of our sponsorship deck today.
Correct. And boy, I mean, I've had a lot of really close friends that their whole job was cannabis middleman or whatever, you know, and so when that really vanished in the last 5 years, you a lot of them are like, wow, it's difficult. People are like, so what did you do between 2005 and 2022? You did zero things like on their resumes, and that's difficult because it's hard. I mean, luckily here in California, most like employers can not judge people that have been in this space and maybe looking for something else, because it just doesn't exist anymore. At least, if you managed a farm for 10 years and there's literally no shame in being like, yeah, it just wasn't penciling out, like the margins are horrible, and you could be the best manager ever, and you could be a wonderful employee for some company that might be in a different space. But yeah, it's just like it's been so difficult for our community here in Humboldt, and I'm sure in the Bay as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, I mean, yeah, we could talk and talk.
Oh, we could totally go on. I always tell people, I'm like, listen, people who've worked in the cannabis industry, they're not stoned all the time, so they can't do the work. We work very hard. We understand nuance. We know how to pivot like nobody else. And you want to talk about putting in hours in a day. It is not an 8-hour a day, 5-hour work week. I wish there was more life work balance. But on the other hand, I love what we do so much that it doesn't hurt that bad.
Yeah. You do it because you love it. And I mean, it was a lot like when I was doing the nonprofit stuff to help keep the river from perishing, essentially. It was really quick when you saw the people that didn't have a heart, their heart wasn't in it, that they didn't last. And it's the same with cannabis too. You're like, well, if you want just a job that is like, you don't give a shit and you just show up and you're there are jobs like that. But these fields like this aren't those kind of,
No.
you don't want to do that because you won't make it. You have to care. And
You do. You have to be the kind of person who wants to have impact 24 hours a day. I mean, I always joke, I say I'm incredibly greedy because I want all my 24 hours to matter. And I got to hand it to people who can bifurcate that. And you'll be like, yeah, I just do this job, so I have this life outside of work. But that has never resonated for me. And everybody that I know who's in cannabis that are really dedicated to it feel the same way. It's like, no, I want something meaningful. I want to pay the bills, but more than that, I want to have meaning to the work that I'm doing. And I think with your work that you've done with Humboldt Seed Company, that really comes through because you've become one of the most recognized names in cannabis with seeds. And, your innovation and the cultivars that, you've produced they've been very noteworthy. What do you think is the key to that success? I mean, I know part of it is like the dedication and the passion that we were talking about, but what else do you think comes into play with that?
I got a big nose, so you can smell the buds really well. No, I think probably the best thing is like being in it for a long, long time. And that is something that, people always say like, oh my God, I get people that come up and they gush on us and I'm usually like, well, right place, right time. And I consider us really to be lucky. And they're like, no, bro, you like, saw. And so I've learned that like, yeah, there were a few years where like everyone was growing OG Kush. Let's just say, for example, it was like 2005 to like 2010, maybe 2012. It was like literally the predominant thing, more than predominant. Like if you weren't growing it, you had a hard time selling anything that wasn't OG, maybe a little sour. You could move that too, but and that's where I'll take some credit. I had an option of dedicating the whole farm, my 215 area, whatever you want to call it, to just OG Kush depths and just, or out OG Kush full term, depth, full term, blah, 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 blah. And, or penciling off enough of that to where I could keep this seed thing like going, even though that was like probably one of the harder times to even sell the seeds too, because, all the classic Humboldt cannabis community folks kind of begrudgingly were having to go over to growing OG, which was a clone only at the time. Like, and now I can literally say, like, we have seeds that are, for all intents and purposes, like OG Kush. They are really indiscernibly OG. Back then, that takes generations of breeding, and so we didn't have it. And so the old timers, not even old timers, like the classic Humboldt growers, when they came back to get their seeds, they'd be like, dude, do you have anything that's OG? Because that's all the buyers ever want. They're like, our biggest, most beautiful plants and the best buds that we love to smoke were some of your shit from, that you gave us last year. But the buyers, they still just said, we only want the OG. And that was the predicament, and that was where it was hardest, and that was where, the seed company could have gone by the wayside had I just been like, well, screw it. I can probably make a lot more money this year growing depths of OG Kush, and didn't do that just because I'm stubborn and said, nah, I think, and nothing against OG. It's like an amazing strain, but I kind of said to myself, like, if I love smoking all this different cannabis, and if I'm passionate about it, and I've had, cannabis coming out my ears for the last 15 years and sort of got to be choosy, you know what I mean? Like, there's a difference between, I'll meet a lot of people that they act like they're a super aficionado expert, and they've only been involved with cannabis for 5 years, 10, 3 years, 2 year, 5, whatever. And they're like, this is it, this is what's the best, and it's going to be the best. And I try to be nice, but I'm always just like, you'll change your mind, and you'll want all kinds, and all kinds is the best, like, what's the best strain? I'm like, having like 5, 6, 10 different ones that you can choose at any given moment. That's the best strain, because it depends how you feel, and it's such an amazing plant that, like, maybe the Jurassic Parks, whatever I got that day, was perfect for watching a movie with a girl that you thought was cute. Maybe I might have had a totally different experience if I had a different type, but so that's why it's important. You got to have the right kind for the right moment, so you can, fully appreciate everything it has to offer. And you asked me a question, and I talked about all kinds of different things.
No. You got into some good stuff, and I completely agree with you. I mean, that was something that I learned, working in a dispensary. Like, I had my little bag we used to get a gram every day that we worked, so we'd try everything. So, and then we'd compare and contrast, like, how it worked with our bodies, because, we have a baseline on how the majority of people respond, but your mileage may vary depending on that walking chemistry experiment that, we are all so different. And it's like, my friends who didn't work in cannabis would be like, what is this bag that has all these other little bags in it? And actually I got pulled over by the cops once, and they were like, are you selling this? And I was like, no, this is personal use. This is for sleep. This is for daytime. This is when I want to strangle somebody. These are all the different ones that I like. And it's like, there's something different for each part of the day. And thank goodness, like, you like, you were stubborn and you pushed the envelope on that. One of the things that makes me sad these days is that we've lost so many great genetics from the 215 days because those small growers, they may be growing it for themselves, but it's not going anywhere else because they were, it's like the little old lady who used to come to the shop with her pound of Cali Widow. She grew some for herself for her asthma. It was like a Cali Orange White Widow cross, and she'd have extra. So she'd bring that and some keef, and my patients used to like to use it for migraines and also for their asthma. Well, that's gone because she was a home grower. It was just a little side thing for her. And so, now things, for a while, and I mean, I guess to a certain extent still, it's pretty homogenous out there on the menus. And it's really nice to see different things. I mean, it's, we got into Girl Scout cookies and then everything was desserty. And it's not that I didn't like it. I did, but you get tired of it. Like you want to see different things.
Totally. I mean, I love pizza. Do I
Yeah.
want to eat that morning, night, and
Hell no. Hell
yes.
no. Well, and you're known for your big old pheno hunt, which like I really like. I wanted to come this year, but we're going to be traveling, and so I would love to the next time you do it because I've heard such good things. But could you walk us through what that is? Because a lot of people don't understand it, but I just, as a geek, I'm like, yeah, like what are you doing with that? I know you get it's a several week process, isn't it? And you get a lot of people involved in the experience. So I'd love if you'd let our listeners know about that process.
Yeah. So it was something that we've been doing this process, and basically, let me see, I have like a little graphic, but I'm just going to use my pens. So I've got some pens here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these are going to be plants, and it's going to be the smallest pheno hunt Humboldt Seed Company has ever did. Five pens. So when you grow from seed, right, you're like, we're working our very best to make very uniform seeds for predictability. And we, I think, are probably one of the leaders in that effort. But that being said, the way that you come up with new and exciting cannabis and explore the realm of everything that it has to offer is via breeding, right? And by doing that, you're bringing, Sharpie with Bic and seeing what happens. And when you do that, you're going to have a lot of baby Bics and Sharpies, right? And so, remember, it's the smallest one ever, but we planted the Sharpies and the Bics, and the way that you know how good which mix of Sharpie and Bic is the one that you want to move forward with, and you love it, and pretend that there's thousands, because we usually try to pheno hunt 10,000 plants a year. That we started that in 2018. Yeah. So what we do is we go out, and this we've been doing since the early 2000s, but we go and we take a clone off of each pen, each plant, and then that gets a tag in the field. So, this is going to be Sharpie Bic number 1, Sharpie Bic number 2, Sharpie Bic number 3, so on and so forth. And those clones are now, we're doing this like literally yesterday. I was doing this with my team, and my daughter Hallie does a lot of it, and Ben's down there doing it a lot. And the collaborating farms that we work with, sometimes they do some of it for us. More often than not, we're like literally filling up nurseries with just row after bread rack after bread rack, or those shelves with the wheels. We call them bread racks, but clones, millions, hundreds, and because we take like 2 off each plant. That's kind of our standard, and it's pre-bud, because if you take it once it's budded, it's a lot harder to undo that flowering senescence that happens, and so it's more work, but it guarantees a much more higher success rate in the clone and everything. So now we've got these labeled to the tray that's in the nursery, and we know that, let's just say that this Sharpie, upside down Sharpie number 3, is the best thing we ever saw out of that 10,000. So now we save samples of this flower, and we all gawk at it and test it and see it in the field. And we go back and we pull out of that nursery space the correlated clone that is genetically identical to Sharpie Bic 3, and then that is the way to capture those genetics. And so, pheno-hunting itself is just going out and we have a rating system. I have a book with me. That we've been using for 15 years. You can download it on our website. We made it available to everybody, but it's a spreadsheet, and so we have these little booklets that we give out and people write. We've also tried, getting a bunch of fancy tablets, like iPads, and then they got too sticky. So we went back to good old fashioned pencils and paper. But then you have the hunting is picking and kind of using your senses to choose what you think, or in the case of where we started in 2018 with the 10,000 plant phenotype mega hunt, where we invited as tons of people to come. And so then it was like this crowd source data sort of kind of thing, where everybody's opinion matters. And that was really cool. And that has turned into this massive thing in the last, I guess 8 years now. So, well, yeah, we'll be going, I'm sure we're going to do a big thing in 2028, because it'll be our 10-year anniversary of the mega hunt. And so
that's exciting.
I guess it would be 10,000 plants for 10 years. Is that just 100,000? That's just 100,000. But it's a lot of plants to be looking,
Yeah, it's a lot to go through. And I know I've had a couple of friends who have done it, and they've said how much fun it is. They haven't been able to do the whole thing. I think probably your team is probably the only group that can actually keep it together through the whole thing, because it's a lot.
It does. Sometimes it spans weeks, and we've done different varying lengths. 2 years ago we did clear from Northern California to SoCal, basically. This year we're kind of focusing on pheno-hunting with a little bit of a focus on rosin yield, or not yield, but just all the different components of what makes something a good varietal or strain for doing that, for making washing and doing rosin. So and every year we've had a little bit of a different theme, you could say. So
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't realize, if they don't cultivate that, I am a rosin and hash lover. And it was very educational for me to understand that I used to have favorite flowers and be like, why don't I see a concentrate in that? And they're like, well, it doesn't the trichomes aren't appropriate for that they don't have that kind of a yield. And would you explain to our listeners the differences between the flowers for the types of modes of use that are used?
Yeah. So the real specific nuanced breeding that is really still exciting for us is stuff like that. And it's since you asked, the rosin trichomes, which we have some a close-up of some trichomes right behind me there. And what we've kind of figured out in the evolution of cannabis loving is that those bulbous trichome heads that you see that look like crystal balls are where most of the good stuff, at least from the cannabinoid and all the way from the cannabinoid to the terpene to the other things that we call them terpenes, but really there's so many more things that are even more influential, like
phenols and flavonoids, things like
uh,
that.
exactly. So I like to not just say that, but for the call them terpenes because that's what everybody knows. So but those little heads have sometimes will fall off the stalk, and when they come off of it easily in the washing process, they call that the weak neck syndrome or whatever, which is not probably a technically correct way of saying it, but it's good enough for me. And there are just generally like the density of how many of those there are. Also, you don't want them to be weak in the sort of the encasement, the cell wall or whatever, the trichome bubble itself, because then they'll pop easily. And then when you, like, one of the ways to simply get it a little bit of a judge on whether a variety is good for washing or not, as far as yield goes, is you just rub your fingers on some of the sugar leaves and you feel whether they feel sandy or greasy, and you'll hear that a lot. And greasy, more often than not, is because the trichome heads might not be as thick walled, and so the head bursts easier, which makes no difference at all if you're smoking the flower, but makes a big difference if you want to do the washing, because you want those trichome heads to be intact so that they'll be easily separated in the process that is basically making bubble hash. And when I remember bubble hash was a big thing, we were super into it, making bubble hash, and I assumed that it was going to be like forever an awesome product in cannabis. But I think it was around 2005 or so, and I'm totally guessing that was pretty hot to do here in Humboldt. And then by 2008 or 9 or 10 or somewhere in there, it was like, people had tons of the bubble hash and no one could sell it. And like, I always enjoyed putting a little bit on a bowl or rolling some into a joint, but from a, marketability, it wasn't very marketable for a long time. And it was almost like it was somewhat forgotten about. And then when the rosin thing came back in and people started pressing rosin just out of buds at first, and, whoever it was, these innovators locally, which is definitely, not a Humboldt Seed Company breeds, but there's some amazing, and we innovate in that department for sure, but there's some amazing people that have figured this cool stuff out, and like, I know the person who came up with the water, the washing process for bubble hash, and I got to meet her. And
Mila.
Yeah. And then the other person who kind of was involved, I can't recall, but I mean, these people deserve a lot of credit, and it's not us, but it's cool technology. It's because everybody was doing a lot of extraction, but extraction with solvents is different. And I'm not the judge of any of this. Like, I actually do really enjoy some, like my friend Scott does wonderful butane salt, extraction for some strains. And it's like certain things, it's very difficult to get those terpenes and cannabinoids to come through when you're just doing rosin.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there's a place for all of it. And
I do
you
too.
see the trend. You see the trend. At first I was really kind of anti like the butane and the carbon extraction stuff, because I just figured, like, why in the world would I want to dip my wonderful medicine in butane? But after understanding, how much you can clean it, and how I'm like, yeah, I'm not judging, like of all the things that I expose my body to, like I'm not going to sweat just like the details of that. So
I think there's also it's a very personal, emotional connection to what you choose, because like back in the day, I would take out bubble hash, and somebody who had been smoking since like, the 60s or earlier would be like, whoa, wait a minute, I can just sprinkle that on. I'm used to pressed hash. And so they saw that as an innovation. But there was also, even still, when we would get things like pressed hash, and my buyer would be like, I'm not sure how this is going to sound. And I was like, wait a minute. I know a certain person or a certain group of people that, from the nostalgia point of view, will totally be into this. This is the same person that would come in and be like, I miss Thai stick. Like,
Right.
they're like, and so there's function, there's nostalgia, there's so much that like rolls into that. And and now that we're like getting into these times where we're talking more about like terpenes and emerging cannabinoids, are you seeing more excitement around terpenes, minor cannabinoids, and potency? I mean, one of the things that I like to talk about is the fact that we've been doing this race to the top with THC percentages, but I feel like we're getting more conversations about the fact that that's not the end all be all. Like, I was talking to somebody not too long ago about, yeah, a high THC potency could be great, especially for medicinal use from an analgesic perspective, but you could have something that's, maybe 10, 13% THC with a really interesting cannabinoid profile and terpene profile that could easily be just as euphoric and just as pleasant. You're just not consuming as much THC. This episode is brought to you by Fat Nugs Magazine, a global perspective of cannabis and stoner culture as a bridge to the rest of the world. Right now, you can join Fat Nugs Magazine, Beard Bros Farms, Freedom Grow, and Jailed for Weed in the upcoming Prisoners Edition, and help spotlight current and past cannabis prisoners and their stories, because no one should be in jail for a plant. Find Fat Nugs Magazine's beautiful print copies at your local dispensary, fatnugsmag.com, and on socials. Cannabis culture welcomes us all.
Oh my God, yes. It's wild how much emphasis has ended up on that one number, and it's so, in my opinion, not deserving of that much emphasis. And yeah, I think we're finding out more and more how many other, THC analogs there are that could have incredibly be more influential on your experience than just what the chromatograph spits out for THC, and yeah. I mean, that's like when we went down to Morocco to do some exploration there and try some of those old, really, original genetics, and smoke that famous hash. And I was like bracing myself, like this is going to be, I thought maybe it would be strong. I didn't know what to expect from it. And it was awesome. And I had what I felt like was brought me way back to, sort of like the older cannabis, or a different time in my life, or whatever it was. I was like, wow, this is so different. And honestly, like, I was very pleasant and welcome. I was like, this is great. And sure enough, we took that hash to a laboratory, and it came back that like I think it was 12% THC, and for hash, that's like nothing. But whatever else was in it was awesome and like missing in most of our modern day cannabis. It was clear to me. I was just like, we need to open our minds so much more. It just sort of drove that home a lot more for me, that it's not about that. And of course, unfortunately as well, there's this thing called, business. And to stay in business, you have to make something that people want to purchase. And so as a seed company, we make seeds that are very, very high in THC. We try to have plenty of other options as well when we get the farm that thinks that they can find a market for those diverse cannabinoid type cannabis, strains. But I'm always like, be careful, because usually it's us that are like deepest in the industry that know, and the people that are just, consuming cannabis or purchasing cannabis on their way home from work and have 5 minutes to think about it, and then they just want to go home and get ripped. And it's education, and they're the ones that are spending the money. So if right now they think that they want the highest THC for the cheapest price, then I guess that's what we'll give them. But we also should be putting as much energy into opening minds and being like, yo, this is not where it's really at in the long,
Yeah. I mean,
like, I think earlier, maybe I didn't get all the way through it, but it's like when have cannabis like coming out the wazoo for your whole life, you have more than you can possibly consume. Like there hasn't been a time since I moved here to Humboldt County and started growing my own that I had ever been like, oh, I shouldn't smoke so much, I'm going to run out. Like I've always had as much as I ever wanted, and when you have that, and that's lucky. But when you have that, that's when you start being like, well, I actually really just want this right now, this kind, or I prefer that experience rather than, and so we've had prohibition in this country. Of course, when we come out of prohibition, or, we're not out, but we're hopefully coming out of prohibition, that, like people are going to go and be like, holy shit, I can buy. I mean, I'm sure this happened with booze. Like, holy shit, I can buy booze. I'm going to go buy myself like a bunch of really cheap whiskey that's really high proof and just have it and like look at it and be like, I can have whiskey that's get me drunk for months if I wanted. And I think that's maybe where the stage we're at right now.
Yeah, it's kind of like when we were kids, like in college, the crap we used to drink that was like high octane, that now like you couldn't get me close to it. And like you, I have that same good problem to have. I have a lot of weed around me, but it's also like mine is a hybrid sort of thing, because like coming from when it was so hard back home to come across it, to now having like just a large amount. It's like I love trying different things. I'm really like kind of picky. I like to geek out on stuff, but at the same time, and Jeff always laughs at me, he's like, you don't have to smoke that joint to the bitter end. And I'm like, it comes from not having it when I was younger and having to search for it. So it's like that, like the behavioral stuff is.
I know it. It's like your great grandma that lived in the Great Depression, who's like, what are you doing? You didn't finish your liver and onions?
Right.
You're like, oh, God.
Don't let that go to waste.
Don't let that go to waste. That's a good roach. But yeah, exactly. And, like, just like what you said, like I got so blitzed when we raided this friend of mine's parents' liquor cabinet, And they had, we took the Everclear, we took and one of the things I'll always remember, the peach schnapps. It was disgusting. It was like a horrible peach schnapps, and we like mixed that with Everclear. Next thing you know, I was like basically about to die, and probably 13 years old, and
Yeah, that's the age. That's the
yeah,
age you do stuff like that.
right. And so like I fortunately didn't die, but got in trouble and will never ever ever be able to drink like a peach schnapps. And I don't, it's not the worst thing in the world, but like forevermore I've found the taste of a fake peach flavor just to be disgusting. And so, you know, like I'm always like, be careful, yo, with that THC, because I'm not a big drinker anymore, but I was for most. I mean, I had tons of interest in, you know, specialized beers and things like that. And, you know, there's a lot of really cool things out there if you don't sort of spoil your appetite with like overindulging. And I believe that you can do that with THC. And so, you know,
Absolutely.
be careful, because I'll tell you what, you're probably not going to be shopping in 5 years for THC and like be like, oh my God, I got the highest proof cannabis ever. Because, you know, I'm never going into the liquor store and being like, yo, I just got the strongest bottle of Everclear. You guys all want to link up after work? And no, it's like not how it is. You don't want just that one thing. You
No,
want,
you don't. And I think about it kind of like I never like to make an alcohol comparison because
I know.
we're a safer alternative, but I will
Yeah.
make the comparison to grapes because there's a lot of when we're talking about agriculture and terroir and appellations and things like that. And I think of, you know, the stock cultivars at any given time that everybody's smoking. And it reminds me of when people are like, oh, you know, I'm into Cabernet, Chardonnay, blah, blah, blah. But then you have like people, groups like the Rhone Rangers in California that are like, yeah, we're doing all these other varietals that actually really thrive in this Mediterranean climate. You should try these. And you turn people onto that. And all of a sudden they're like, bing, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, like those other things that buttery over oaked Chardonnay that I like to have maybe with you know, a cube of
Yeah.
ice and um, you know, all of a sudden you're like, this stuff is way more interesting to me and I want to check this out too.
Yeah, and with weed, like so much more so, because I've been playing around with doing some home brewing and with like little apple ciders. We have a big apple orchard and pear orchard, so we've been mixing all this different stuff. And yeah, you're right. It is cool to use different, you know, grape cultivars, use different, even, you know, alcohol fermenting sources. But at the end of the day, like you're also have a yeast, then you also have the way that you bottle it, and you have the how long. And but with cannabis, like I feel like it's really really which genetic you have is so much more influential than even that wonderful analogy that you just made about, you know, the different types of wine grapes. And yeah, there's like five major ones, right? And they're, you know, that's boring to me, and they're genetically identical. But with cannabis, it's like even more so, because you're not like adding anything to it. You're more often than not, you're smoking, you know, either the extract or the pure flower. And
Mm-hmm.
so different than like with wine, where you're taking one grape and fermenting it one way, and then, you know, bottling it one way and
And doing your
aging it one
blends and all
and
that.
the other. Yeah, like cannabis really matters. And it's a great analogy with the wine, but I feel like, yes, it's even hits home harder with cannabis. That like,
Well, and it's one of those things where it's like we can do comparisons with other things, but it really does stand on its own. And that's why in this time more than ever, like developing today's lexicon around this is so very important. And looking ahead, I want to I know we're running out of time and you're so much fun to talk to, Nat. So I'd love to talk about, get you on again and geek out about other stuff. But when you see federal legalization or international trade impacting, how do you see that impacting companies and breeders in the future? Because we're seeing like a lot of seed companies coming out from other parts of the world, people having conversations about their cultivars and just seeing the breeding programs, even in other areas of our own country, but also throughout the world. Like, what do you see in the future? And actually, what are you excited about?
Yeah. Well, I think that, you know, from a global perspective, I think there's a lot of really exciting potential with cannabis. And so that is encouraging. And we've had some of our best experiences, you know, I mean, like, look at like I'm not sure whether we're doing Emerald Cup this year in Cali or not, but that was almost undoubtedly like the unchallenged, like the event, the Cannabis Cup of the world for so long. And it
Absolutely.
was, you know, it's wild that it kind of became so difficult for one of my other heroes, Tim, and that whole crew. People give him such a hard time. People have given it, but I've done some event organizing over the years, and I would always just be like, do you have any idea how difficult it had to been for them to navigate all these regulations that just came up after having this precedent of this huge event where, I think one year they had 100,000, close to that many people, and millions and millions of dollars of commerce happening in the 215 age there at the Cup, and the, huge influence on the whole culture. Now, we see other great places taking that baton a little bit, like Spanibus and this Mary Jane in Germany, and watching the industry, or whatever. I like to think of it as a community, but at the end of the day, there's some money involved. So, but watching it change and morph, and things that I never in a million years thought would have a hard time because of one thing or another. Cali has been a difficult place to run a small business, and all I hope is that we figure out as a planet, and I mean a country, the planet, whatever, how to not allow just 20 or 30 corporate monoliths to just dominate everything in the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Before we know it, we're going to be buying, Walmart brand cannabis, and it's already, there's some businesses, and I always find myself catch myself, because I'm like, well, the biggest company in California is tiny compared to the biggest company in tobacco, or the biggest company in whatever, wheat, corn, rice, it's not even really comparable, or the biggest company in wine, you know what I mean? And so we're still itty eensy weensy little, but it's a microcosm for those pressures that happen, where it pushes a lot of the great companies that really just want to serve their clientele more than they want to just make money.
Yeah, well, and then you also look at, and this is something that I've talked about from a policy perspective. I mean, when I first started in cannabis, and I came into California as an artist. I worked in corporate, and then I moved to nonprofit. And what I saw in the 215 days was that we had this opportunity to create commerce with compassion. We were small businesses. We created community projects for our community, for the general community. Like dispensaries were community centers. You were buying your cannabis there, but there were also other programs, and it was a community. People talk to one another. They look forward to coming. These small businesses contribute to their communities, like what you would see when you go up to Humboldt and you see all these amazing stores and restaurants, and the education system, how it was amazing. And this was all propped up by these small cannabis businesses, and people can say what they want, but that brought a lot of goodness to the communities. And when you get large companies coming in, they come in, they take the money, they move it out. They don't care about the people who are working in the communities that are employed in their jobs most of the time. And these are huge disconnects. And it's so I think, like, you know, the dream, the pipe dream that I had of we could be looking at commerce in a whole different way and influencing other industries. I feel like we can still have that as long as we look at the bad habits of people who are coming from other corporate e- areas that are bringing in, and let's really correct them on that, because that isn't the way to make money. It's not the way to create abundance. It's playing checkers instead of chess. And I just wanted to, like, when you were mentioning Walmart, and the other year I had Greg Anton on the show. He's an attorney. He's also an amazing drummer. He was with the legendary band Zero, but he's Lynette Shaw's attorney, and Lynette has the only dispensary in Marin. And when he went to the Ninth Circuit for her, he told the judge, there is a dispensary that sells drugs, liquor, and guns, and they allow children inside. And he said, and it's called Walmart.
Yeah, right. Totally.
And I was like, yeah, that gets you thinking.
It took me a second. I was like, there is? Wow.
I know, right? It's like that joke that you gotta, like, load up. But gosh, I've had so much fun talking with you, Nat. I'm so glad that you were able to take the time to sit with me. For people who want to see what you're doing, follow the company, you know, geek out on seeds and pick some up for their own cultivation, how do they do that?
So we're in many, many dispensaries across California, and we are also blessed to have a partnership with California is one of California's largest Native American tribes. So we actually just do distribution across the whole country on our website, HumboldtSeedCompany.com. And so anyone can hop on there. We're very responsive to, like, we definitely, we even answer the emails quickly, and we even have a phone number, which is crazy.
That's, like, unheard of these days.
Yeah, it's not like there's real people here. And, you know, I didn't talk very much about the science behind our breeding, but we very, very much are driven by science. And I always say, like, probably half the seeds we sell are grown by farmers at a large scale, but you know, we sell so many retail for the home grower, and of course, you know, we charge more for those. So we have, you know, a good revenue stream from that, but I will always be very devoted to providing. I mean, DCC, the, you know, California Cannabis Control, said that we were, you know, they were giving me a hard time, and they were like, well, you're selling by far the most seeds in the state of California, and so you should have your shit together. You should, you know, always have your track and trace updated daily. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. That's, but they didn't shut us down that afternoon, but that was their reason for why we should have our act together. And I was like, really though, we're selling like the most. And they're like, yes, come on, get it together, buddy. And so I'm proud of that, because when you sell to a big farm and those are your, you know, where a lot of the seeds go, that's when you have the pressure is high. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want Johnny and, you know, Jason and our farmers of Humboldt that are legends. I don't want to get that call in, you know, early August. Like, what was wrong with those seeds that you got me eating? Nat, what are you doing to us? Those are like, that's a breeder's worst nightmare. So we breed with science, and we really put our heart and soul into what we do. And there's flavor, taste making as well, but we're always trying to just look out for, like, put ourselves in the shoes of someone who they built a brand, their life depends on it. They are proud. It's their hopes and dreams. And it's been one of the hardest industries like ever, I think, a lot of people thought this is going to be so much money. Well, you better really love this plant, because it's not easy, and it's not easy money.
No, it's not. And thanks for being one of the real ones. That's why I was so excited to kick off Craft Farmer Month with you. There's so many of our regenerative sun-grown craft farmers use your genetics. You're a big part of what we all love. And so I'm really glad that you were able to be a part of it.
Oh, well, you're wonderful, Sara. And I can't believe now I have no excuse. You're going to be a big part of we'll get you involved in everything from here on out.
I love that. I would love that. I can't wait to geek out with you. That'll be so cool.
Yes, absolutely. Well, you're welcome anytime. Come check us out anytime you're in the area.
Thank you so much, my friend. And will you come back so we can get nerdy and really get nerdy sciencey?
Yeah, let's get nerdy sciencey. I love that.
I love
this
it.
was good. We got to figure out where we all stand, where our hearts are. So
it's true. So true. Well, until next time.
All right. Adios.
Adios. And everyone, remember, if you like listening, please give us a review, share it with a friend. Let us know what your favorite episodes are. And if you'd like to stay in touch over social media, we are Planted with Sara Payan on Facebook and Planted with Sara on Instagram and Twitter. You can also go to our website, www.plantedwithsara.com, or listen to us on our parent network, Radio Misfits Network, where there are other great podcasts, like one of my favorites, the Winemakers Podcast. So check it out. You can listen to Planted wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, whether that's Pandora, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Apple, Stitcher, TuneIn. We are there. So join us. And until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, it's a wild world out there. Be good to one another. Until next time, take care.